Thank you both for being here. I have an informative question, just something I'm curious about, and then a more polemical one to raise. So the informative one is I'm just curious what you think was unique about the Greek situation when Pythagoras was thinking that, and this is really a light, easy question, but that led him to be as creative as he was, and subsequently Plato and a few others. And then I guess the more polemical question is, at least from my own knowledge, it's extraordinary how far the Greeks went. They almost had an industrial revolution. They were very close to it. But it seems that scholars today agree that they just didn't care about that sort of thing. So that there was a big lack of interest in the practical or the profit motive, in some sense, for the Greeks, in a way that maybe the Romans didn't have, the more brutal Romans that didn't come up with their own inventions and things, but if they did, it was for practical reasons. So I wonder about this age that we live in that's totally, I would assume, as you both allude to, profit obsessed. And I imagine most people here at the table will go into jobs or seek careers that are mainly for profit or to live a comfortable life, and that's all a very good thing. And this is the goal for most people is to be comfortable and to have a nice family and to do all these things. But is our obsessive drive towards profit and comfort somehow standing in the way of any of the sort of ingenuity that we might have found in the Greek era, such that that sort of spirit is now no longer relevant for us today? Yeah, that's a question.
Thank you. Can I ask your name again, sir?
Oh, it's Leland.
Leland, thank you. It's a very, for me, beautiful question because I love Pythagoras. And let me start at the last part of it. I'm not against at all the profit motive. If anyone wants to donate to the science project $100,000, you'll get your name on it and can come to the castle.
Would you mind just standing
Yeah.
and speak up?
So the question about Pythagoras is related to a very important question that's connected to all the things we've been debating for 10 or 15 years in our culture around DEI, which is in many ways a debate that happened in the academy when a famous book by Bernal came out. Actually, there was a view called the Greek miracle. This is the basic historiographical view from the Enlightenment until the mid-20th century, which is that the Greeks were unique. And they were unique because they were the predecessors of essentially the white colonial empires who were doing the scholarship. And that's not being reductive. That is how this form of thinking came. It came out of Oxford and Cambridge in the English context, and in the German context, it of course came out of the German universities. And long before Germany became an integrated empire in 1870, 71. So that is the normal view, is that there's something unique about the Greeks. So you're raising an extremely important and active scholarly question that has a lot of significance. And this is the answer. I did an audio course on Greek philosophy teaching this, and this is what I bring out in much more detail in my book, that Pythagoras said he learned it from the Egyptians. And not only from the Egyptians, where we know we got a lot of Greek mathematics from, we know the Babylonians could prove what we call the Pythagorean theorem at least around 1600 BC, maybe even another 1,000 years earlier. So the best that we know about the history of Greek mathematics is that what the Greeks invented was the proof system. So this is very important, right? Babylonians, for example, had a base 6 system. It's kind of amazing, but that's why we still have a lot of base 6 number systems in our culture, because of the Babylonian role in astrology and astronomy and mathematics. But the Greeks invented a method, and this is what the philosophers did, the people that I consider myself the spiritual inheritor of, because it means I can inherit everything, the science and all of the religious wisdom. And I think that's the unique element. And so I don't want to take anything away from Pythagoras. He was by any measure what we would consider a world historical genius. But I think the key to it was that they saw what we would consider science and math as a way of life that had intrinsic value. And so that's connected to the second part of your question, which is, does that mean that they were impractical? So there's a great scholar. He was a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton for his work in the history of Greek mathematics. He's a distinguished chair in philosophy and Russian studies at Notre Dame, Vittorio Husla. He is himself a genius, but his work on the history of mathematics is extremely distinguished. I did an interview with him. You can read it. It's called The Two Scientific Revolutions. His answer to the question is essentially the Greeks give us a proof system, and they were far more advanced than we even recognize. There's compelling evidence that the Greek mathematicians knew about non-Euclidean geometry, as we would call it, which in the Western tradition we thought was only invented in the 19th century. Of course, very crucially in the case of Riemann because of its applications by Einstein with general relativity. But in point of fact, the best work in Greek mathematics suggests they even understood non-Euclidean geometrical systems. So why didn't they come up with the scientific revolution? I can't answer that even in 10 minutes, never mind one more minute. But the short answer is I think you're onto something very deep, which is they did have values of practicality. Thales, who was one of the great founding philosophers, was mocked for being impractical. And to prove people that his knowledge of math and the stars was relevant, he predicted an eclipse and made a fortune off of it. And he also made a fortune off of being able to predict weather patterns. So philosophers have sometimes tried to prove their points and play the market. Thales with great success. But it's true. Why did then we get the scientific revolution? Well, I'm happy to say the co-director of the Meanings of Science project, Peter Harrison, is the world's leading scholar on this. He just wrote a book called Some New World by Cambridge University Press. And the shortest answer of about 50 years of the past work in the history of science is Christianity and broadly Judaism. In the 16th and 17th century, the view of people like Isaac Newton, as I was talking to you about, Kira, Newton and many others who founded the Royal Society, the longest running, most prestigious scientific body in the world, which I think is currently debating what to do about Elon Musk. But the Royal Society was founded by people who were absolutely Christian, and they had very novel ideas. And one of the ideas was Adam and Eve were perfect and they knew everything, and they could know everything. And the literal view that animated the founding of modern science in the Royal Academy, the Royal Institution, was that through science, which they called natural philosophy, the term science as we know it wasn't invented until the end of the 19th century, they thought that using science we could recover humans' abilities that sin had destroyed. So the reason that we have the modern idea of science is because Francis Bacon famously said, the purpose of science is not to know things, it's to change things. He said it was to ameliorate the human condition. Then that is not a Greek idea. It is a Christian or Judeo-Christian idea that the purpose of knowledge is not knowledge for its own sake, but that the purpose of knowledge is to improve the world. And we live in a world that is divided still by this inheritance. The weakness of pure mathematics and fundamental research being funded in our culture has to do with the fact that we've abandoned the Greek founding vision, that these things are intrinsically worthwhile. The power of our technology and the stupendous amount of progress we've made has everything to do with the ethical culture of the scientific revolution, which saw the purpose of science as the improvement of the human condition. And this was a religious idea.
Was that the end of the question? Okay, great. Hi, thank you so much for coming. This was an incredible talk. I'm a philosophy major, so this really appealed to me in particular. And I had this experience a couple years ago where I was sitting with my brother and I was talking about whether or not I believe in God. And he was sort of asking me these questions about, well, if you saw a miracle in front of you, would you believe in God? And I said, I just think I would assume there was some other explanation that had nothing to do with God. And he turned his computer around, and he had been typing everything I was saying into ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to ask questions to continue the conversation along. So I basically had this fall from God with ChatGPT in this dialogue that I thought my brother was my interlocutor, as it were, but wasn't. And so this got me thinking kind of about the spiritual capacities of AI. And you guys obviously have spent a lot of time thinking about the meaning of life and how AI is either bringing us towards that, reflecting sort of our own meaning back onto us. And I'm not saying, that my one experience in my dorm room with my little brother has anything, has to make significant impacts on how we think about it. But I was just wondering your thoughts on kind of the spiritual potential for AI and it kind of, not only being this force that is super mechanistic and super perhaps negative and drawing us away from our spirituality, but if there is perhaps a way to harness it for, I guess maybe in my case it wasn't so positive of a spiritual situation, but in general, spirituality.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Interesting that you bring that up, because this may sound like a plug, but literally my organization just launched an experimental site called simonjacobson.ai. I kid you not, you can check it out.
You can pay me after the dinner. You can pay me after the dinner for dropping the question.
No, it's free. No monetization involved, not at this stage at least. It's essentially, you can have a virtual conversation with me or a chat.
Oh, because it's trained on your...
Yeah, it's strange because I have a lot of content online. and I've been having chats with myself with it, and I think it's better than me,
How's he doing?
better than I am, and doesn't get tired. So it's, and to me, it's really to address exactly the question you're asking, which is how to use these tools, and I see them as tools. Remember, I grew up in a world where I used a typewriter. Any of you know what a typewriter is? Really, why is that a joke? I mean, nobody uses a typewriter anymore. So I used a typewriter. And from a typewriter, we went to a word processor. And a word processor, then a fax machine. Then a broadcast fax. Then I don't know if you know about a BBS. It was called a BBS, a bulletin board system. It was like an electronic documents. It was the precursor before websites. Anyway, so to me, it's all about tools. I always saw it as tools, more sophisticated, more sophisticated. So the question that I posed to myself and to my team was, and we happened to have an AI engineer, top guy from Silicon Valley that called us, that loved our content, and he says, why don't I train one of the AI agents? And the question was, how can we bring a spiritual message to as many people as possible that really AI can do at almost no cost, and then multiple languages. So right now we're experimenting exactly with that. So to me, there's no question the whole purpose of it all is to bring the soul to the world. You know, I know monetization, business, most companies are using it for efficiency and trying to cut costs. But in my case, I'm using it completely for altruistic purposes, which is how these tools can help disseminate. You know, we're experimenting now with 5 languages, Spanish, French, Arabic, Hebrew, and Russian. We're going to expand soon. Interestingly, if I can tell you some results, especially the Arab Muslim world, it's hundreds of thousands of people are watching my messages in Arabic right now. And it's completely AI, which means they sync your lips and my voice. We of course, sent it to some friends in the Arab world to make sure it's accurate and so on. But it's amazing. I laugh every time I listen to myself speak Arabic. But this is what it is. So I don't know how others are using it for this purpose, but I can tell you from the front line that we're using it exactly for that, to test the waters. And I can tell you, some people can't stand it because they're afraid of anything that's AI. One guy told me, I thought he'd be impressed, he says, next thing you're going to tell me my dead grandmother's going to be talking to me, you know. So he's afraid of anything like that. But there are enough people who are early adopters or, you know, all these different type of targets. And we're going to see how it works. It's all experimental at this point. So I really believe it can literally create a spiritual revolution because you can you can repurpose messages at a pace that you can never do manually, as well as answer questions that just humanly not possible. I asked some questions that I myself asked to myself, and it answered as good as I would have answered. So it's training well. Of course, it's not perfect, and especially the languages are very exciting because language you speak to people in their language. That was never possible. You know, I mean, without interpretation, here it has that capacity. So I see it as a tremendous tool in that direction, and it's just the best is yet to come. What do you think?
Yeah. I think it's amazing. It's like it's something I aspire to, this sort of use. I'm one of the people who was much more afraid, I'll say, coming at these things as a writer and an editor a few years ago. And when ChatGPT came out, I was like, I had studied it intellectually, but I was like, I need to start using this. And I was chary about putting in my own data. But I think your example is a beautiful example of where it's intrinsically spiritual. I think when we don't see spirituality, it's because we're being scientifically inadequate. Right, so if you think about what happened, your brother, a human being, wanted to talk with you. And he wanted to hear what you said, and he used that when you're not telling you. But there's an incredible human depth and connection behind the use of that technology. And he got things from you, including the reaction at the end when you realized it. He got things from you that are profoundly human. And so the spiritual dimension was built right in. So that's exactly the issue with ethical superintelligence. There are complicated issues that we can't discuss in 15 minutes. But what I said generally about alignment, that's the fundamental issue, is the issue in science, why we're rediscovering purpose at a very new level because of the complexity, particularly of the cell. It has to do with, people in biology will know this, molecular and systems biology in particular. Thanks to the integration of mathematics and combinatorial structures, we can decode the incredible complexity of a lot of biological systems, and it's clear that they have agency. And so the issue of purpose is related to actually effectively acting in the world, which many of you know is where AI the dream of AI is to go towards agentic or agency-based AI. It's always one step around the corner. The best experts say it is soon. I can't comment, they're the experts. But I think the concern about AI and agency is the problem you're raising becoming very explicit, which is, will we acknowledge that we are the ultimate agents, or will we lie to ourselves? It's much better if you're pitching for billions of dollars to lie and say, I, Sam Altman, am not the agent who is ultimately humanly responsible for everything my company does. But that is what you're responsible for if you run a company. And so the issue is, I think, with science, are we going to become rich enough and comfortable enough as people to realize science is this incredible process that philosophy in the deepest sense has given us to pursue the truth. But to be completely scientific and honest, we have to be honest about our limits, about what we don't know, and about why we are doing things. If you knew a person was doing research solely and exclusively for their career, you would trust them a little less than if it was Einstein who was doing it as a patent clerk because he couldn't get a job. And after publishing the most famous papers in 20th century physics, it still took him 9 years to get a job. So if we didn't have that intrinsic love, and Einstein said it must be something like, his words, a religious passion. So I think the beautiful thing about AI is, like all science and technology, the people doing this are often literally what they think they are, the smartest, most ambitious people with the best values and ideals. The issue is, that means they're philosophers. So I think when we begin to acknowledge the philosophical dimension or the spiritual dimension, in Tarkovsky's sense of the purpose, why are we using these things? That determines what they mean. If we're not honest that you can use AI to build weapon systems like DARPA's doing, and these are serious issues that we as citizens, I would just say, please think about this and vote. We need a very different political culture in which you tell your congressman, I don't want people developing AI systems to destroy China, because these are things currently we're not voting about, but they're going to wreck the world if we don't realize we have civic agency. So I think the spiritual dimension of AI is always latent. It's who's the human using it, who are the humans building it, for what purpose did they build it, and for what purpose are people using it? And that's a scientific question. If I ask a scientist, what is the purpose of your research, like Rabbi Jacobson said, and they can't give a good answer, they're not getting a grant.
Wait, why don't we want AI warfighting tools?
Well, that's a big question. We can talk about it.
Why not? I mean, you're saying like as if we would think that we should.
Well, first of all, we already have some, right? But if you're talking about agentic AI, there's no going back from a mistake. So that there's a very simple ethical principle. If a mistake or harm is irreversible, you need an extraordinary burden to enact the act that could cause an irreversible harm. As soon as you start developing weapon systems that are trained to kill people, all of the error problems in AI would mean you kill the wrong people.
Right, like humans do.
But humans are held responsible for it, and we currently don't even have a legal framework to hold people responsible for what happens in a car crash. Currently, right now, that's being litigated, and some of the responsibilities going to the consumer, or the person who made the car, and some of it's going to the actual vehicle. But these things are currently not even debated in that tort sense in civil law. So do you want the government of your democracy deciding to solve a global ethical issue without our permission to say, let's create systems that can kill people? I would just say, as citizens, we want to have a very deep and well-informed conversation before our government, it turns out, does that. I'm not saying as a military person I don't want us to use all the best tools, but that logic is what led to nuclear escalation.
I want to.
Yeah, let's
Kira, who's next?
yeah, actually Mitchell was next. So, do you have a different question than that, or was it?
I do have a different question, but if people are interested in this topic, they should.
I want to just add one point from this topic. I would submit, if I may, one more acronym called EI, emotional intelligence. And I think if we don't take that into account, we're really cutting out maybe the single biggest force that makes decisions in our lives. I know everybody likes to think that they're intellectuals and the mind controls it all, but I would challenge you and say that your biggest decisions in life are emotional ones. Maybe informed by intelligence, maybe not. And so basically, if you cut out psychology from this philosophical discussion, when I mean by psychology, I mean the human aspect, which in many ways is what we've been saying in different words, we will not really get anywhere. And I think that's a big problem because there's a big disparity between our academic credentials, our intellectual capacity, and our emotional maturity. I don't even know what that disparity is, but it's definitely not close. You know, you ask most people, you know, they're brilliant, their minds, but ask them how mature are they emotionally. You know, how fast do they get insulted? What about their egos? How many things bias them? All the prejudices, additional to all the traumas of our childhood, and you name it. I mean, trillions of dollars are going into one thing more than AI, and that's therapy and medicine and self-medicating and all the other addictions that are somewhat trying to numb our existential pain. And that wasn't even brought up tonight. But you take that out of the equation, you're taking out like a major part of humans. And we think we're just like these superhumans, we're building these machines, and it's all going to be great. It doesn't work like that. They used to say, do they still say? Junk in, junk out. That's what they say at the time of technology. You put junk in, you're going to get more junk and faster pace. Is it junk? I don't know. It's garbage in, garbage out, something like that. So I just wanted to throw that in, that monkey wrench. Okay.
We were able to take a few more questions, so if anyone has shot. Yes.
Thank you both for very interesting talks. I will pose a question to both of you, different questions. So, Simon, I got caught by your story about teaching religion without talking about religion, and I was wondering, I also saw some of your videos on YouTube, and it seems to me that like you talk to a very universal crowd, and especially with the experience of talking about religion without insinuating religion, does it teach, do you think in your eyes, any universality on religions in general? Basically, if the same kind of principles now have a big success in the Arab world, does it insinuate anything about Islamic and Jewish religion and the connection between them? And Samuel, I love your talk. I agree with a lot of things. I also disagree with a lot of things. I do now computational biology, and I come from AI, and also been in the army for 10 years. And I think that I have a lot of questions, but the question that I will focus right now is the problem of the alignment. It seems to me like you talked about alignment, like it's kind of like how AI can be politically correct or not discriminate between people, which is a big problem. I agree. I think that people inherently are discriminating and creating these boxes because our mind is not capable of capturing the reality without these boxes, right? And maybe the convergence of science, as you said it, also I'm sure that it is connected to technology and the fact that watching you on YouTube is so easy right now, and knowledge, yeah. So basically, what I think that alignment is not losing control on AI. Basically, this technology has the capacity to not think like a human brain, and although a human brain is very interesting and important to research, we might have a better architecture than the human brain to get insights and knowledge. So as I see it, the alignment problem is more about how do we not lose control of the development of AI than making it not discriminate between Mexicans and Chinese people. So,
And before you start, can you also just actually define the alignment problem?
Let me answer my question. Sure, no, please. Okay. So I'll answer the first half that you directed to me, unless you want me to answer his question. I have a mic here, so sorry. Well, I personally hate the word religion. Let me just make that clear. I never understood what it meant. To me, it's a label. It's like someone says, oh, you religious. I remember once a New York Times journalist asking me, so how do I define you? You're religious, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, rabbi. I said, how do we define you? Are you a religious Orthodox journalist? He says, I'm just a journalist. I said, I'm just a human being. You know, so to me, the religion, okay, you're a human being, and a religious human being, what means? You're more human or less human or more refined, less refined? And we all know religion doesn't necessarily mean refined, you know? So I don't know. I found it to be a word that's really meaningless unless you define what you mean. So I would vote if I would able to get rid of all the denominations. You know, I remember once a woman asking me what my opinion on conservative Judaism. And conservative here means not versus liberal, but versus Reform or Orthodox, Reconstructionist. And I said, I don't accept it. She says, I know all you Orthodox are the same. I said, but I don't accept Orthodox Judaism either, or ultra Orthodox, because these are all labels and denominations that are man-made. Let me ask you, are you a Reform soul or an Orthodox soul or a conservative soul? What about Moses? Was Moses an Orthodox? Or what about God? What about God? Is God even Jewish? Is God circumcised? I mean, you know? So basically, what we're doing is imposing man-made labels on ideas that are esoteric. You know, soul doesn't have a color, doesn't have a shape, and you got to really reframe and revisit the words we use. We're imposing material terms on spiritual concepts.
Yeah,
This is a major problem.
Yeah, but you
So-
believe there are Jews and non-Jews, so that's a label.
Okay, we need to define what that means. Yeah, exactly. Because let me put it this way. There's one God who's neither Jewish or not Jewish, created all human beings in the divine image. That's what the Bible says. So is there a difference between a Jewish divine image and a non-Jewish divine image? I would ask you, Rabbi. So yes, I could talk about it.
But all I'm saying is that you do believe in a world where there are labels.
Well, I would say
You just
that-
choose which one's the strip and which one's the case.
No, I would say not labels, but I think diversity. Just like there's diversity. So what? There are people with brown eyes and blue eyes. That is a real distinction. But
Male, female? Do you believe in the male, female, or is that a label?
no, I think male-female is a real distinction. I think most people would feel that way. Some people who may have issues with that, that's their issue. But I'm saying, I mean, to say that, what are we going to eliminate all male-female definitions? I don't see that as a label, by the way. Just like I don't think if someone says they're 5 feet tall or 6 feet tall, that's not a label. So I was talking about man-made labels that humans impose on things like soul or on human beings. But if someone were to say to me that the non-Jew is inferior to a Jew, I would say, in whose eyes? In God's eyes? In your eyes? So yes, I know that these distinctions can become the source of all racism and discrimination. So I'm just trying to distinguish between the two things. So my response to you is like this. My understanding of Judaism is that there's a universal truth that comes from God for all human beings on this earth, 8 billion of them, and that's how I try to convey the message. That doesn't mean there aren't specific messages for a Jew, just like there's specific messages. When I speak, for example, to the Muslim Arab world, I speak about Abraham. I say, what does our grandfather Abraham, our common ancestor, would say to us all? So I speak to them like my cousins. You know, it's a little disarming, and some of them don't like it. I get hate mail too, trust me. But the point being is, I think it's time for us to be able to transcend the human imposition of all these words on people. That, to me, would be the real emancipation. So it's a big part of my own internal battle, and the work that I do is to try to get rid of the human definitions and try to get to something that is more, what I would say, I mentioned before, like a cross-pollination of the dignity of every human being, no matter who you are, no matter what background, no matter what choices you make for that matter. I may totally disagree with you, but I still will never invalidate you as a person. I could disagree with you. I disagree with some of my siblings, and or maybe all of them, but I never cease to love them. And this is a big problem today. People don't know how to everything is personalized. You know, if I don't agree with you, means something's wrong with you. You know, you have to be wrong for me to be right. That's a major distortion that comes, frankly, from immaturity, and definitely not into open intellectual inquiry. So that's part of there's a lot more to say on this, obviously. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'd love to talk more and especially hear more about the disagreement. Of course, you know, you are the expert and you're of course right. Let me just connect, this sort of starting broad before going technical. So my understanding is, of course, the same as yours, but this is how I see them connected, particularly to the issue of super alignment, which is the first issue, as you said, and you correct me if any of this misrepresents your understanding of the state of the art, please. But the first issue is the very basic issue of, will the AI we're developing do only what we want it to do? And for example, not do these techniques where it develops means that we didn't think about to achieve its end, these gaming things that can have catastrophic functions like in a war context or a medical context. And so I do understand that's the sort of, you could say, the most nuts and bolts issue of alignment. is at an engineering level, we have to make sure before we release systems into a certain context of use or the wild, in a commercial sense or an application sense, we need to make sure that they are consistent in meeting the mandate that we as the engineers and designers have put into them, correct? That's like the level at which you're talking about control. And so, but building from that, it's a very short step to the issue around so-called super alignment, because, you know, I don't know if there's a Moore's law, but AI, I know there's debates. I'd be interested to know what you think about the debate about are we reaching a scaling wall. I know many of the big companies say no. Marcus and others famously have been arguing yes. Maybe we need different systems. The issue is, let's assume we don't have a scaling problem. Let's assume that something like Moore's law is going to apply to the development of AI systems, even if they're not LLMs, in 20 years. Well, then we're going to have AI systems in 10 years that are, by definition, many orders of magnitude more capable, which would mean that the kinds of things that they could do would be vastly more unpredictable than we are currently capable of understanding at this time. So the alignment problem, to me, masks intellectually a much deeper problem, which is the control over an engineering system that you're designing to be agentic raises the question whether you can rationally say you know what any current finite human biological actor would do if you give them a goal. And the answer is we don't know that. So in other words, I think there's a conflict between classical computing ideals, which say computing systems are deterministic, and therefore if you have a proper engineering understanding of the system, you can literally build it, and at any point in the system you can stop it and figure out exactly what input led to that output, right? That's the classical idea we had of computers. But my understanding, again, as a non-technician who's listening to the experts like yourself, is that's exactly what is different about AI, is that there is a degree of cognitive-like features like spontaneity, relative creativity, and therefore definitional unpredictability. Unpredictability is creativity viewed from the standpoint of the person who finds it inconvenient. If you want people to be creative, you want them to do things you can't predict. So I think the alignment problem masks very hard problems in engineering, which I'm sure you know better than I do, which is, okay, I want an AI system to do what? AGI? The definition of that, even though it's incredibly vague, is exactly multitask, comparable to a human being. Well, we don't even know how to define what humans are doing when we switch context. We have no neurological or scientific description of what's happening when I context switch. It's so complicated. It's very easy for me to say I can look at the wine glass and bring my hand to it, or I can look at my hand and bring it towards the wine glass. To cognitively capture that, we currently can't do that yet. And that's one of the reasons robotics is so much slower, because we're finding out mimicking what the body does is enormously difficult. It's easier so far to do the LLMs than to have robotics that can do something like this reliably and not have enough force to accidentally crush a person's hand. So I think the actual issue of the fact that we can't predict our own biological organism accurately, but we presume that we'll scale systems that will be smarter than us that we could control. This is a very serious scientific, ethical, and I think engineering problem at its very root. The idea that alignment just means control, but what do you want to control? If you want to control something smarter than you, by definition, you cannot control an agent that is more intelligent than you are. By definition. And therefore the super alignment problem, I think, bleeds down into all of the alignment issues that are working towards the goal of AGI, if that makes sense.
Kira, if I may. It is 9:30, everyone, so this is our soft close, so if you have to go, please take 60 seconds to leave, and we are going to be serving dessert and continuing the conversation until about 10 p.m.
That's okay with our speakers.
That's okay with our speakers. But before you all leave, please join me in thanking Kira for hosting our
So a 60-second break if you want to leave the table.
And really, should we pass around desserts?
I would love to hear your,
Hello, I'm Lizzie. Thank you all so much for your remarks. One thing that I think about when I think about AI is, I can't divorce it from like all the harms it causes. So whether that's enslaved labor, mining materials for technology, the ecological devastation, or the connection to the loneliness epidemic. I'm just curious what y'all think is like, are we risking too much, whether that means like harming our souls or at least breaking the bonds of human connectivity by just trying to confront ourselves with this technology?
Can you rephrase it a bit?
Yeah, just like with all the harms associated with this technology, we've talked about its ability to confront ourselves with it, but also its ability to have this sort of spiritual nature. But at the same time, are we risking too much, harming ourselves and harming human connectivity by still using this technology?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, the cat's out of the bag. So I don't think you could impede the progress. I mean, we could pose these questions. I don't even know if you can legislate the technology ultimately. It's going to ultimately come down to people's responsibility. I think there's going to be major debates. Maybe the biggest one was mentioned earlier. At the end of the day, money talks, and the materialistic urges of trying to become wealthy is going to be maybe the biggest driving force. And we know that has nothing to do with ethics. So the question is, who's going to keep the checks and balances? But I don't see technology being able to be stopped. You know, what are we going to do? Stop this whole, there's too many opportunities, too many different people working on it. And I don't know if we want anyone controlling it and say, no, we'll only go that type of progress. So I think it's going to be a major existential human question that's going to change the course of history. You know, I think it's going to be people like ourselves who are going to take a stand. Because the fact is right now, the ones that are most powerful are the ones that have the money, and the ones that are controlling the levers, so to speak. But unless the human race itself in some way rises to the occasion, which I don't really have an idea how that can be. I mean, my role in this, I feel, as a teacher and as a person who has a platform, is to just say it all. Because I believe best knowledge is what shed a light on all these questions. So it forces people, because remember, a lot of the, let's call it the more, I guess, the more dangerous forces at work love to thrive in darkness, in ignorance. So I think we need to shed a light on all these big ethical questions and make sure it's up front and in front of everyone's eyes, glaring. And that's, to me, the real way of really keeping a check and balance on all of this. I mean, in some ways, like the nuclear deterrence was the only way to keep people in check. It's not perfect, but I don't really see another way to approach it. Because to stop it all, it's not going to work. To just let it go with ignoring these bigger human issues, that to me is worse than dangerous. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree broadly. I would just add, I guess, a layer building on what Rabbi Jacobson just said, which is I sympathize with the concerns. And in fact, as a humanities side person who, came into the world of working with scientists from the background in philosophy, and so therefore kind of humanities in the American sense, these are the concerns that a lot of people, I think, who study this culturally or historically have. But the unfortunate reality is all the negative things you described, as you know, they're already about what's in your iPhone before there was AI. So the issue is it very disturbing that we haven't corrected all the incredible ethical sort of problems around the technology we already have, and now we're building more powerful technology? I think it is disturbing. I agree, though, with Rabbi Jacobson. I think that, what do we do about that? Well, one, we have to educate ourselves enough to raise the questions you're asking and think about what are policy responses to that. Sherry Turkle, who I don't know if you guys know who she is, she's this brilliant anthropologist of technology at MIT, involved I think with the Media Lab. She was just with Jaron Lanier at the New Yorker. Whenever you guys see that New Yorker conversation it was like 3 months ago, and Turkle was very adamant that she did not think young people should have access to these chat systems. So I think things like that we need to have real, urgent cultural ethical debates about. And I think that what that's going to require in the long term, and this is stuff I'm interested in doing, I'm interested in partnering with people doing this, but I think frankly we need to build something like, not another UN, because that maybe arguably didn't work out so well, but we need to build at least localized versions of communities that will actually debate and find policy responses to these things. So in other words, it can't be, are we going to use AI or not? I agree. It's like China is already in many ways much more advanced than we are, and I'm not anti-Chinese. I don't like the way that the propagandistic aspect of the State Department demonizes Chinese culture just because we disagree with the government's state policies. But like Huawei, many of you probably know Huawei, they are really, in a way, one of the most impressive, I think, technology companies ever created. And they have most of the 5G network in the world, around 30% of it, relative. The US has been pushing back. So the reality is there's already going to be AI developed that is developed by an explicitly communist surveillance state. So there I agree that at a geopolitical level, you have to just accept that that's happening in the State Department and the Defense Department and deal with it. And I'm concerned about what that means, as I indicated. But I think at a civil level, what we can do in a democracy is say, the question you're asking is really important. We should work on building projects, nonprofits, even businesses to find things like what Jerry Lanier calls MIDS in his Harvard Business Review paper that essentially could work to organize these things and bring them to a policy level. Because I do think we should say, yes, we're pro-AI, but we don't want it in schools, for example. Or yes, we're pro-AI, but we don't want the horrible things that we already know are happening with people's images. I think we need serious legislation around data privacy. And so I think the next frontier of like ethics is self-ownership. We do not have a legal regime that acknowledges that your bodily data belongs to you, because no one imagined the concept of that in the 17th century. But currently, all of our physiological data is extracted and sold by what Shoshana Zuboff calls the surveillance capitalist system. And I think we need to use AI, but we also need to radically reform, I think, the vision we have around technology. And so I think if we don't do that, I think the worries you have will be valid, while they unfortunately also won't stop everyone from the arms race.
I have a question. You speak about, should I use that?
I guess my question is what can we do? Like you speak about, theoretically, kind of thinking about the human experience and not just, like figuring out AI before we actually know the questions ourselves, but what can we do? Like, should we go into AI so that we can make it better? What can we do about it? What can be done about it?
I'll go first, then move on to yeah, I think can I just ask, how many of you use AI regularly? Like, I use Perplexity all the time now, especially since deep research just came out. Yeah, so a lot of it. So what do you guys use it for? Like,
I mean, Google has, it comes up with an AI thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think one thing we can do is, I think we can decide whether or not we like the tech ecosystem we're in and vote with our money. So that's the first thing I would say is I think with the tech ecosystem we're in is destructive. Like Gmail was already not private. Just so you know, if you haven't thought about it, any email that has AI is completely insecure. Like this to me is a major problem. Like I do consulting in sensitive areas. Like this is a sensitive area. If you think about it from a superintelligence is of grave concern to militaries. And that aspect of this, to me, is a disaster. Like, I do not like that Apple integrated AI. Why? Because we know they're selling our stuff to OpenAI. That's why they did it. Apple has a contract with OpenAI, and now everything on your phone is getting fed to them, even though that's illegal, but we know that it's happening. So I think the first thing we need to do is, I personally, if there's a billionaire who wants to fund this, we need a tech ecosystem that's focused on data ownership and data privacy that explicitly doesn't build, I think, surveillance and AI systems. Like I would like a phone that's just a phone. I would like an email account that is not being read by essentially a kind of quasi-cognitive agent that's giving detailed marketing level, PhD, CIA, PsyOps level of reports of my content supposedly anonymized to Google to feed their AI. Because why are they doing this? Because they need our data. So I think the first thing we need to recognize is the current expansion of AI into all of our platforms is a complete breach of trust in all of us as users.
Yeah, but why is the AI aspect of it bothering you? I mean, your data's being read and monitored and stored even short of AI by the big tech companies. Like, is it
because
it's not an AI element. I mean, once you own the phone and you buy something on Amazon, they know what you like to buy.
Well, it's true that it's a fair point, but it's true that marketers know. But even if a defense company wanted to go through my emails, 10 years ago, they literally would have had to have an analyst read the emails.
Okay, so-
They,
so
but no,
the
but
data theft is there.
No, but they did have someone literally read through.
right, but now you could literally just take a person's email and say, well, tell me what they're talking about, or tell me where their most important data. So I think the breach is a much higher
You're
breach.
gonna have to use the phone in the, have you seen that phone booth? Have you seen the phone booth?
No,
I think, you haven't seen the phone booth?
I don't think so.
We have a phone booth in the courtroom.
Okay, I'll use that for, yes, I will.
And you're gonna have, I think you're gonna be limited to that phone.
I-
From here on forward, so.
Well, I hear that. So that's the debate is, are we gonna go on with that? So I think one, we can vote as consumers to build an alternative technical ecosystem, because I do think there's a lot of money in companies that privilege data ownership and data privacy.
What kind of phone do you have?
I have an Apple, but it's an old one. It hasn't
Why
updated.
not have a flip phone, like, if you want to go to?
Well, I do want that. I'm just saying.
No, but you could have it.
Wait, I have mobile
You could have
phones
it.
that have flip phones.
I don't understand.
Let me, I'd like to answer.
Yes, please. Sorry, that's not much of an answer.
Here's my suggestion of what we can do. Own your soul. Figure out why you're here. Discover your mission in life, and discover your soul. That's the single biggest thing you can do. First of all, to immunize yourself, the best defense is offense. You're not going to be able to play defense against these big machines, but you can control yourself. If I would leave one takeaway message from this evening is, you have a soul. It's the single most important commodity, more than all these tools, more than all the information in the world, and own it. Get to know your soul, and you do that by, I like to call it a spiritual spa. SPA is an acronym for study, prayer, and action. Every day, study something about your soul, something spiritual, a book, an idea, a concept, listen to a video. Prayer, something emotional, a poem, something a meditation that touches you emotionally, and finally, action. Good deeds, behavioral. Basically, it's a cognitive, emotional, and behavioral conditioning. Take control of your life. Because most of us are not in control of our lives, even though we think we are. And these machines will take over if you don't take control of your life. It's as simple as that. Your soul and your mission. Find your mission statement, and you'll see how many problems you'll solve in your life. That's my takeaway.
And with that, we're gonna end for the night.
We're done?
I think that, yeah. And then ask private questions if you'd like.